There's a certain peace that comes with age. You learn to sit quietly with your morning coffee, watch the sunrise, and believe that you've earned your rest. But life, it seems, has a habit of testing even the calmest souls when you least expect it. My name is Greene. I'm 70 years old, and for the last 50 years, I've worked in the same small-town bank, climbing my way from teller to branch manager. I built a quiet life, one of integrity, honesty, and the simple joy of earning trust. But I never imagined that the trust I built my life on would become a weapon, used by someone I was about to call family. You see, when my daughter's fiancé demanded $50,000 just before their wedding, I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just smiled, and I froze his account instead. It all started 3 months before the wedding. My daughter, Sophie, has always been my world. Especially after her mother passed, she became both my reason and my routine. She's smart, gentle, and the kind of woman who can see good even in people who don't deserve it. And that, I'm afraid, was exactly her problem. Because when her fiancé, Derek, entered her life, he didn't see Sophie's kindness as a gift. He saw it as an opportunity. I should have seen it sooner. But love can make parents blind in ways they don't like to admit. I thought he wanted her heart. It turns out, he only wanted her inheritance. Derek was charming. Almost too charming. He was the kind of man who would look you in the eye, just long enough to make you believe he was listening. But then you'd see his gaze drift towards your watch, or your wallet. He claimed to work in real estate. Or at least, that's what he told people. No one could ever quite explain what he actually did, but he was always full of stories about big clients, new deals, and luxury developments. He wore expensive suits and drove a leased sports car, always insisting that appearances mattered in his line of work. And while Sophie adored his confidence, I saw something else behind that polished smile. Desperation. And desperation, as I've learned over the years, always comes with a price tag. The first real red flag appeared one quiet Sunday evening. Sophie called me, and I could hear a tremble in her voice, the kind only a father would notice. "Dad," she started. "Derek's a little stressed about the wedding. He says he needs some help with deposits for the venues, catering, the photographer." I asked, trying to keep my own voice steady. "How much help?" She hesitated for a moment, then whispered. $50,000? He says. It's just until after the wedding. I felt my stomach tighten. 50,000 for a wedding they'd supposedly planned months ago. Still, I kept my voice calm for her sake. "Tell him. I'll think about it," I said. But what I didn't tell her was that I already knew something was deeply wrong. The very next day, Derek called me directly. There was no hesitation in his voice. No respect, just pure entitlement. "Mr. Greene," he said, his tone sharp and businesslike. "I assume Sophie told you about the funds. I need to transfer by Friday. Otherwise, well, there won't be a wedding." He actually said that no wedding. As if their marriage was some corporate merger he could cancel if the terms didn't suit him. I let him finish his little speech, listening to his arrogance fill the room. Then I smiled to myself and said, "Of course, Derek. Don't worry, I'll handle it personally." It thanked me smug and satisfied, completely unaware that he had just handed me all the rope he would ever need to hang his own greed. That night, I went back to my office long after closing hours. The bank was silent, filled only with the low hum of the Volta security system and the steady ticking of the old wall clock. I sat down at my desk, opened Derek's client file on my computer, and there it was, his account, freshly credited from a so-called business loan he'd secured using falsified income documents. I didn't move a single cent. I just clicked one button on the screen. Freeze account. And as I leaned back in my chair, I realized something simple, but incredibly powerful. Sometimes the best revenge doesn't come from anger. It comes from knowing exactly where the money sleeps. Because when you work in a bank your whole life, people forget you don't just guard their money, you guard the truth. I've always believed that a man's worth isn't measured by how much money he makes, but by how he earns it. For 50 years, I woke up before dawn, poured the same black coffee, and walked the same 3 blocks to the small-town bank that became my second home. I started there as a young man, right after the Vietnam era, just another kid with a pressed shirt and big dreams. Over time, I earned trust, not through charm, but through simple reliability. People in town came to me for loans, for advice, and sometimes just to talk about their worries. Maybe that's why betrayal hurts the most. It never comes from strangers. It comes from the very people you tried to help. When my wife Carol passed away 15 years ago, the house became unbearably quiet. The laughter faded, the music stopped, and dinner became something you ate, just to fill the time. But then there was Sophie. She was only 20 back then, full of hope, still believing in the good in everyone. She moved back home for a while, trying her best to fill her mother's place. She'd cook me breakfast, leave sticky notes on the fridge that said, "Smile today, Dad." That girl was my heartbeat. I worked longer hours, just to make sure her future would be secure, and every sacrifice felt worth it, because when you love your child, you never count the cost. When Sophie graduated from college, she took a job at a design firm in the city. She loved colors, art, and architectural, the things her mother used to adore. Watching her become independent made me incredibly proud. She called me every single night, even if it was just to say, "Good night, Dad." But like most fathers, I knew that one day that routine would end. One day, she'd meet someone who would take my place in her world. He who's never ever expected that the man who'd take that place would try to take everything else, too. The first time I met Derek, he seemed almost too polished. He shook my hand with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, wearing a smile that looked practiced, not natural. He spoke about his business ventures, dropping names of investors and cities I knew were just buzzwords. He laughed loud, ordered expensive wine, and made sure the waiter noticed his watch when he lifted his glass. My daughter, Sophie, looked at him like he hung the moon. I stayed quiet, but inside, something felt off. Because I've always believed that real men don't need to prove what they have. They let their actions speak for them. Over the next few months, Derek became a constant presence. He talked big about luxury condos, crypto deals, and exclusive clients who paid up front. But every time I asked simple questions like, "How do you manage your cash flow?" or "Who's your financial backer?" he would dodge with a disarming charm. He called me sir in public, but Harry in private, always with that fake friendliness people use when they want to sound close. And whenever he smiled at my daughter, I could see at that gleam in his eye that said, "She's my ticket." But I said nothing, because sometimes the only way to expose a man's greed is to let it grow wild. The first real test came during a family dinner. Derek started talking about his upcoming project, a massive real estate opportunity that would supposedly triple in value in 6 months. He looked right at me, waiting for admiration. I just nodded slowly. "Sounds risky," I said. He laughed it off. "You've got to take risks to make millions, Mr. Greene. You of all people should know that." I smiled back. "No, son, you don't need risks to make millions. You need patience to keep them." The table went quiet, and for a moment, I saw something flash behind his grin. Frustration. That was the first time I realized he didn't want a father-in-law. He wanted an investor. Sophie, of course, was blinded by love. Every red flag I saw, she painted white with hope. "He's just under pressure, Dad," she'd say. He's building something big. And I wanted to believe her. God knows I tried. But I'd spent my life studying money, and money always leaves a trail. One evening, I stayed late at the bank and did a little digging into his financial records. Nothing confidential, just the parts open to the public. What I found made my blood run cold. Derek wasn't building anything. He was drowning in debt. His company had multiple pending lawsuits, unpaid taxes, and a string of failed projects under his name. He was leasing everything: his car, his apartment, even his office furniture. I just sat there, staring at the screen, wondering how I was going to tell Sophie without breaking her heart. But love is strange. You can warn people all you want, but they only hear what they want to believe. So I decided to stay silent for now, because sometimes silence builds the kind of storm no man can run from. 2 weeks later, Derek called again, his voice full of laughter and charm. "Big news, Mr. Greene," he said. "Sophie and I set a date, a summer wedding at Crystal Lake Estate." He made it sound like a business achievement, not a celebration of love. I congratulated them, masking my unease. But as he talked about venue costs and investor friends attending, I realized he was planning a show, not a marriage. And little did he know, the man he was trying to fool had access to every cent he touched. At that point, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I would play along, let him think I was the old, gullible father he could manipulate. I'd even let him ask for what he really wanted. Because when greed gets comfortable, it becomes careless. And when it gets careless, that's when the real lesson begins. It started small, like most problems do, with excuses. Derek began missing family dinners, claiming business emergencies. Sophie brushed it off, saying, "He's just busy, Dad. He's trying so hard to make the wedding perfect." But even from miles away, I could tell the cracks were forming. Every time she called, her voice sounded heavier. Her laughter had faded, replaced by sighs and hesitation. And when love starts sounding like exhaustion, you know something has gone terribly wrong. One evening, she showed up at my house. She looked tired, like someone carrying a burden too heavy for one heart. She sat down quietly at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Dad," she said softly, "Derek's under a lot of pressure. He had some payments due for the venue, and his investors are late sending the funds." I nodded slowly. "How much pressure are we talking about?" She hesitated. 10 looked up. 50,000. The room went silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall. And in that sound, I heard the moment my daughter's fairy tale began to fall apart. I asked her gently, "Did he ask you for it?" Her lips trembled. "Not directly, but he said if we can't get it, he might have to postpone the wedding. He says it's not worth starting a marriage with unpaid bills." I took a deep breath. Postponed the wedding, the modern way of saying no money, no marriage. I didn't get angry. I just looked at her and said, "Sweetheart, let me handle it." She looked relieved, even grateful. But what she didn't know was that the moment he put a price on love, he'd already sold himself short. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Derek. There was no politeness this time, no attempt at charm. "Mr. Greene," he began, "I think we both know the situation. Sophie told me you're willing to help. I need the money by Friday, or the wedding's off. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but it's business. We've got contracts, deposits, vendors." He said business like marriage was just another spreadsheet. I let him talk, my silence feeding his arrogance. When he finally stopped, Pramita Saeed calmly, "All right, Derek, I'll make sure it's handled." He sounded smug, confident. The kind of confidence only a fool feels right before the floor disappears from under him. because what he didn't realize was that I wasn't transferring money. I was preparing a lesson. That night, I sat in my study, long after midnight. My eyes kept drifting to the framed photos of Sophie as a little girl, a missing front tooth, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek, holding her mother's hand. I found myself thinking, what would Carol tell me to do? I could almost hear her voice. Protect her, but let her see the truth herself. And in that moment, I knew that's exactly what I had to do. Because when a daughter is blind in love, a father's job isn't to fight her battles. It's to open her eyes. The next morning, I reviewed Derek's financial file. He banked with us. Of course, the same branch, the same system I'd helped build decades ago. His account showed recent business loan activity, balances that made no sense, and overdraft alerts hidden under corporate accounts. It was a house of cards, all smoke and mirrors, built on borrowed money, unpaid credit cards, and fake investors. I didn't touch his funds. I didn't change a single thing. I just watched. Because when someone's about to hang themselves with lies, all you have to do is hand them the rope. Later that week, he texted me again. Just confirming you're wiring the $50,000 today. We've got deadlines, Mr. Greene. Time is money. The irony almost made me laugh. I simply replied, consider it done. You'll have your answer soon. He'd probably thought I was bluffing, that I'd caved. But I wasn't lying. He asterisk. Would asterisk get an answer? Just not the one he expected. The truth about money is simple. It always obeys the man who respects it, not the one who demands it. On Friday morning, Derek waltzed into the bank. I was in my office, reviewing reports, when I saw him through the glass wall. He was confident, phoning and grinning like a man about to hit the jackpot. He strode straight to the teller's desk and announced, I'm here to withdraw $50,000. My father-in-law transferred it this morning. The teller checked the system, frowned slightly, then excused herself to the back office. Moments later, Sikama, to me, Mr. Greene, she said quietly, there's a hold on his account. The system flagged it for irregular activity. I smiled. I'll take care of it. Sometimes, justice doesn't need a courtroom, just a little timing and a calm hand. I walked out to the lobby. Derek turned, pretending to be surprised. Oh, Mr. Greene. Perfect timing. Just a small bank hiccup, I'm sure. I smiled back. Yes, I saw the notice. Why don't you come into my office? He followed me, smug, oblivious, and already rehearsing his next excuse. I closed the door, poured myself a cup of coffee, and said, you know, Derek, money has a funny way of telling the truth. He frowned. Excuse me. I leaned forward. Your account's frozen. Pending verification. We'll need to review all your loan applications and income claims. His face went pale, and in that heavy silence, I heard the sweetest sound in the world. The sound of greed, realizing it just met experience. He stammered, trying to regain his composure. You can't do that, it's my money. I took a slow sip of coffee. Actually, it's the bank's money. Until the investigation clears. You remember those forms you signed? The ones where you inflated your income. His jaw tightened. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. Derek, I've worked in this bank for half a century. You might fool my daughter with words, but you can't fool numbers. They never lie. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Because when arrogance meets accountability, there's only one outcome. Silence. I told him to leave, quietly, before things got worse. He stormed out, slamming the door, muttering about family betrayal. I didn't stop him. I just watched him go and whispered to myself, son, this isn't betrayal, it's protection. Because sometimes revenge isn't about hurting someone, it's about making sure they never hurt the ones you love again. The following week, things began to shift, subtly at first, like a storm forming behind clear skies. Sophie called me one evening, her voice trembling. "Dad," she said, "something's wrong with Derek's business. He's been getting strange calls. He's angry all the time." I kept my tone calm. "What kind of calls?" She hesitated. "Debt collectors." They said something about unpaid invoices. My hand tightened around the phone. I wanted to say, asterisk. "I told you so, asterisk." But instead, I just said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Just keep your distance for now." When lies start to crumble, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just stands quietly and watches. Days passed, and the tension grew thicker. Derry stopped showing up at work. His so-called business partner suddenly vanished. The wedding planner called Sophie in tears, saying half the deposits had bounced. I watched as my daughter's dream turned into confusion and disbelief. She kept asking, "Dad, how could this happen so fast?" I didn't answer right away. I just said, "Because the truth doesn't need time, only exposure." And at that moment, I knew his downfall had already begun. Derek came to my house one night, uninvited. He looked rough, eyes bloodshot, tie loose, hair messy, like a man who'd been chasing ghosts. He tried to smile, but it was the kind of smile built on pure fear. "Mr. Greene," he began, "I know we had a misunderstanding, but I really need that money now. The wedding's in 2 weeks. Sophie's reputation's on the line." I leaned back in my chair, hands folded. "Is it Sophie's reputation, Derek, or yours?" He froze. Because when you ask a liar what he's protecting, the answer always gives him away. He stood there, speechless. The mask finally shattered. I didn't need to say another word. His world was collapsing, and all I had to do was let it happen. The truth had finally come for him. It's a reminder that true strength is about protecting the ones we love, not just with words, but with wisdom. He started rambling excuses, promises, fake tears. "I was under pressure, sir. I was trying to build something for your daughter. I wanted to make her proud." I stood up, walked over to the window, and said quietly, "You wanted to make her dependent on you, Derek. There's a difference." He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. "I've seen your kind before. You call it ambition. I call it manipulation. Because sometimes greed doesn't wear horns, it wears a smile and says, 'Trust me.'" He left that night, slamming the door. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. 2 days later, Sophie showed up again, crying. Derek's accounts are frozen. He says, "You did something." I sighed softly. "Did he tell you why they're frozen?" She shook her head. So I took her into my office, opened my laptop, and showed her all of it. Fake investors, stolen tax IDs, multiple credit cards under shell companies. Her hand covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. And in that moment, my daughter didn't elosia Fiancé. She found her father again. I put a hand on her shoulder. "Sophie, you can't fix someone who lies for a living. You can only free yourself from their web." She nodded slowly, whispering, "I thought he loved me." I smiled sadly. "He loved your potential, not your heart." The silence that followed was heavy, but healing. Because sometimes, heartbreak isn't destruction. It's deliverance. A week later, the wedding invitations went out. Not because the wedding was still happening, but because Derek had refused to cancel it. He told everyone the date was confirmed, pretending everything was fine. Meanwhile, vendors called my office daily, asking about bounced checks and missing deposits. He was drowning and still acting like he could breathe. Because the most dangerous man is the one who has already lost everything but one, he admitted. Then came the phone call that sealed his fate. An investigator from the fraud division reached out. They discovered multiple forged documents, loan papers, tax returns, and identity mismatches. Derek wasn't just desperate. He was dishonest on record. They asked if I'd like to press charges. Primera. Said? No, because prison wasn't the lesson he needed. Humiliation was, and nothing humiliates a con man more than being ignored by the man who saw through him. On what was supposed to be his wedding day, Derek stood outside a closed venue. Sophie had called off everything quietly, returning her dress, canceling the caterers, and sending a single text. "You used me. I forgive you. But we're done." He didn't reply. He just stood there, tuxedo wrinkled, hands trembling, watching the guests trickle away as whispers filled the air. Because in the end, karma doesn't shout. It just shows up, dressed like justice. Later that evening, I sat by the window, watching the sunset. Sophie was asleep on the couch, her eyes still red but peaceful. I poured myself a glass of tea, feeling that quiet satisfaction only age and experience can bring. And as I looked at the fading light, I thought, you don't always need revenge to win. Sometimes, all it takes is a little truth, patience, and the calm of a man who's already seen too much. Because the sweetest revenge, peace. The week after the canceled wedding was eerily quiet. No more phone calls. No more gossip. Just silence, the kind that comes right before the whole truth surfaces. Sophie spent her days resting at my house, trying to put herself back together. But the world outside had already started whispering. Vendors talked. The wedding planner, Todd, and the truth, like it always does, began to travel faster than lies ever could, because secrets might hide in darkness, but truth doesn't need an invitation to shine. Then came the newspaper headline, "Local entrepreneur under investigation for financial fraud." Wedding scandal adds twist. There it was, Derek's name. His company, his picture, smiling beside Sophie in an engagement photo. He must have thought the world would pity him. Instead, they saw him for what he was, a man who built castles on borrowed sand. Because when your empire is built on deceit, the first storm will always take it down. People started distancing themselves from him. His business partners cut ties, investors disappeared, and his friends, the same ones who praised his ambition, stopped answering his calls. Within days, his office lease was terminated, his website shut down, and his so-called company collapsed overnight. And I didn't lift a single finger. I just watched, calmly. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't require action, only patin. One afternoon, I received a letter. It was from Derek. Written in shaky handwriting, it said, "I know you did this. You destroyed me." I loved Sophie. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I folded the letter neatly and put it in my drawer. No reply. No anger. Just silence. Because when a man blames others for his own ruin, he hasn't learned anything yet. But what truly ended him wasn't the investigation. It was the truth finally reaching Sophie's friends, her co-workers, and even Derek's family. Turns out, I wasn't the only one he'd lied to. He'd borrowed money from people, promising business returns. He'd used Sophie's name to impress investors. And once the first person spoke up, the rest followed. Because truth spreads like wildfire when someone dares to strike the match. One evening, Sophie came to my study. She looked stronger, eyes clear, shoulders straight. "Dad," she said, "I saw Derek today." I raised an eyebrow. "Where? At the cafe, near the old park?" He looked empty, like someone who finally saw himself without the mask. I nodded slowly. "And what did you say to him?" She smiled faintly. Nothing. I just walked past him. Because sometimes, walking away is louder than any revenge could ever be. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing for more. Stay safe and take care. After she left, I thought about everything that had happened. $50,000. One canceled wedding, a heartbroken daughter. And yet, strangely, peace. There was no screaming, no shouting, no revenge. Plots just. Quiet justice. Justice that came naturally, without cruelty. Because life has a way of handling the arrogant. You just have to trust the process. The bank audit closed the following month. Derek's fraud case was confirmed. But since no one pressed charges, he was left broke but free. He left town shortly after. Some said he moved to another state. Others said he tried to start another business under a different name. But people remember, and in small towns, memories last longer than money. Because reputation, once lost, is the one thing even wealth can't buy back. Sophie, meanwhile, began to heal. She went back to work at the community center, helping underprivileged kids, something she'd always loved before. Derek distracted her with his grand plans. Watching her laugh again, I realized something. I hadn't just protected her, I'd helped her rediscover herself. Because real love, the love of a parent, doesn't build walls. It gives wings. As for me, I returned to my quiet routines. Early walks, black coffee, tending to Carol's garden out back. Every morning, the roses bloomed a little brighter. Maybe it was the sunlight. Maybe it was the peace I finally felt. Sometimes I'd sit there, cup in hand, and whisper, "You were right, Carol." She learned, and in the wind, I could almost hear her voice, soft, proud, and full of grace. Because the greatest revenge isn't in making someone fall. It's in helping someone rise again. Weeks turned into months. Autumn arrived, coating the town in gold and red, their kind of beauty only time can create. I found myself enjoying small things again. The smell of morning coffee, the sound of the old porch swing, the peace that comes after surviving a storm. The chaos was gone, but the lessons remained. Because pistos and tea mean nothing happens, it means you've learned to stay still while it does. One Sunday morning, I visited the park near the church, the same park where I used to take Sophie when she was little. I sat on the same bench where she once shared cotton candy with her mother, and as the wind brushed against my face, I thought of how far we'd come. Pain had passed, but wisdom had stayed behind. Because pain, when carried with grace, becomes the teacher time forgot to hire. Sophie joined me soon after, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She looked radiant, different. Not the broken girl from months ago, but a woman who'd survived her first betrayal and came out stronger. She sat beside me and said softly, "Dad, I'm thankful you didn't fight him. You just let life handle it." I smiled. That's age. Sweetheart, we stop swinging fists and start using silence. Because the older you get, the more you realize silence can shout louder than words. She told me about her new project, a mentorship program for women recovering from financial and emotional abuse. She wanted to teach them independence, awareness, and strength. I listened, proud but quiet. She said, "I want to help others avoid what I went through." I nodded. "Then you've already turned your pain into purpose. Because revenge ends cycles. Purpose begins new ones." That evening, I received an email from Derek. The subject line read, "An apology if it matters." I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. He wrote about how he'd lost everything: his house, his career, his confidence. He said he'd taken a job at a warehouse in another city, trying to rebuild from scratch. And at the end, he wrote. I know I hurt Sophie. I know I disappointed you. But thank you for not destroying me completely. I sat back, silent, because sometimes the echo of regret sounds a lot like redemption faint, but real. I didn't reply. Not out of pride, but peace. Some apologies don't need answers, just acknowledgement. I closed the email and whispered, "You finally learned." Because closure doesn't always come from talking. Sometimes it comes from letting go. Days passed, and the world kept moving. Sophie visited often, filling the house with laughter again. The garden grew thicker, brighter, like it knew joy had returned. I found myself thinking about Carol more often, wondering if she'd be proud. And in my heart, I knew the answer, because true love doesn't fade with time. It just changes its form. One chilly afternoon, I ran into an old colleague at the grocery store. He asked, "Heard about your son-in-law's downfall. Must feel good seeing justice served, huh?" I smiled faintly and said, "Justice isn't about feeling good. It's about feeling balanced." He looked confused. I added, "I didn't ruin him. I just stopped protecting him from himself. Because some people don't need punishment. They just need the chance to face their own reflection." That night, as I closed my journal, I realized something simple yet powerful. We spend our younger years chasing revenge, but our older years searching for peace. And when you finally find it, you don't want to win anymore. Just want to rest. Primera Ned Bach, watching the stars fade behind the clouds. Because in the end, wisdom isn't loud. It whispers, "Let it be." It had been nearly a year since the wedding that never was. The seasons had turned twice, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, one that old men like me start to treasure. Morning walks, slow breakfasts, evening calls from Sophie. Nothing extraordinary, just peace. Because after 70 years of storms, calm starts to feel like luxury. Then one evening, just before sunset, someone knocked at my door. A soft, hesitant knock-knock, the kind made by a confident man. I opened it to find Derek standing there, but he wasn't the same man. The arrogance was gone. The charm, too. He looked older, not by years, but by the weight of regret, because some lessons don't just age a man, they remake him. Your support means the world. He removed his cap, his eyes lowered. "Mr. Greene," he said quietly, "I know I shouldn't be here, but I had nowhere else to go." I didn't speak. I just stepped aside and motioned him in. He sat down slowly, his hands trembling as he held the cup of tea I offered. There was a long silence between us, not hostile, just heavy. Finally, he spoke. "I came to apologize in person, not for me. Me. True remorse doesn't come with excuses. It comes with silence and shaky hands." He told me everything. How he'd lost the business. How his family cut him off. How he'd been working odd jobs just to survive. But what struck me most wasn't his words. It was his tone. Gone was the pride. Gone was the salesman's voice. He spoke like a man who had met himself for the first time and didn't like what he saw. Life has a cruel kind of mercy. It breaks you until you finally meet the person you were always meant to be. I never loved Sophie for her money. His sighed softly. I loved how she believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. But I ruined it. I ruined everything. I stared at him for a long moment. "You didn't ruin everything, Derek. You just burned the bridges you tried to cross too fast." He nodded slowly, his eyes wet. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say sorry before it's too late. Real regret doesn't ask for forgiveness. It just wants to be heard." I sat back, thinking, at 70 years old, anger takes far too much energy. So instead of judging him, I just asked, "What are you doing now?" He smiled faintly. "Fixing cars. A small repair shop out of town. It's not much, but it's honest." I nodded. "Good. Honest work never needed a business plan." He chuckled quietly, the first genuine laugh I'd ever heard from him. Sometimes, the smallest life is the one that finally fits the soul. He stood to leave, putting his cap back on. "Thank you for listening," he said. "I didn't deserve that." As he reached for the door, I spoke softly. "Derek." He turned, surprised. "Don't waste the second chance life's given you. Most men never get one." He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "I won't. Because forgiveness isn't about freeing someone else. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what they did." After they left, I sat there in silence for a long time. I thought about the man he was, and the man he had become. Both flawed, both human, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger toward him. I just felt peace. Peace. Time doesn't erase pain. It just teaches you which parts were never worth keeping. Later that night, I called Sophie. She answered cheerfully, and I told her, "Someone stopped by today." When I mentioned Derek's name, she fell silent. Then she said softly, "Did you forgive him?" I smiled. "I didn't need to. Life already did." She exhaled deeply, maybe relief, maybe closure. When you forgive, you don't rewrite the past. You close the chapter with grace. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of anger, but reflection. I realized something I hadn't understood in all my years at the bank. All my years chasing logic and order. You can freeze an account, but you can't freeze a conscience. And sometimes, life unfreezes both when the heart is ready. Justice without mercy is just punishment. But mercy without memory is foolishness. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Old habits die hard. I brewed my coffee and stepped outside, watching the horizon blush with the first light of day. The world looked exactly the same, and yet something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying unfinished business. Peace doesn't come from what you win. It comes from what you release. I thought back to the day Carol and I opened our first savings account. We were young, hopeful, determined to build a life from scratch. Every dollar we saved wasn't for luxury. It was for security, for Sophie, for the family we dreamed of. I used to believe money could buy stability, but I've learned it only reveals who you truly are. Wealth doesn't change character. It exposes Italiano. Sophie called later that morning. She wanted to visit on Sunday with a surprise guest. I asked, should I prepare for it? She laughed softly. "No need, Dad. Just be yourself." Her laughter filled the quiet corners of my house, echoing like sunlight after rain. A daughter's laughter is proof that forgiveness has done its job. When Sunday came, she arrived right on time. And with her, a man I didn't recognize at first, told.com, with a gentle smile. "This is Michael," she said. "We've been seeing each other for a while." He extended a hand. "A pleasure to meet you, sir. Sophie's told me so much." I shook his hand firmly. "I hope only the good parts." We all laughed, and for a moment, life felt easy again. When love returns in its truest form, you stop fearing the past. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Over dinner, I watched Sophie's eyes light up the way they used to. It wasn't the glow of infatuation, but the warmth of peace. Michael, her new partner, spoke modestly, listened more than he talked, and treated her with a quiet, unwavering respect. There was no showmanship, no arrogance, just sincerity. And I thought to myself, this is what I wanted for her all along. Because a good man doesn't need to shine. He just needs to stay. After they left that night, I sat alone at the dining table, feeling the echo of their laughter in the room. It was then I realized something simple, yet profound. My plan for revenge had Ewan ruined. Derek S. Life it had corrected Sophie S. path, and in doing so, it corrected mine, too. Because the purpose of wisdom isn't to punish, it's to protect. I opened my old journal, the one I'd started after my wife, Carol, passed away. Inside were years of notes, reflections, and lessons I hoped Sophie would one day read. I wrote one last entry that night. Revenge fades. Peace stays. Protect your heart, not your pride. Then I closed the book gently, because a man's legacy isn't what he leaves behind. It's what he leaves within. The following week, I visited the bank for one final review before my retirement. My name still carried weight there. People greeted me with respect, the way they used to when I was running things. But as I walked past my old office, I realized I no longer missed it. Power had once felt like purpose. Now, peace did. You see, when you reach a certain age, you stop chasing titles and start valuing time. Before leaving, I signed the papers for my final retirement account. The young clerk smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Greene. You've done well." I nodded, smiling faintly. "No, son, I've just done enough." He looked puzzled, but I meant every word. Because success isn't measured by how much you earn, but by how little you still need. As I stepped outside, the cool breeze touched my face. Cars passed by, children laughed, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Life was moving forward, and for once, I was content just to watch. The world didn't owe me revenge, or an apology or recognition. It owed me nothing, and that, finally, was enough. Because the truest form of wealth is waking up with nothing to prove. It's been 2 years since that chapter closed. The noise around Derek's downfall faded, as all storms do. The last I heard, he'd moved out of state and started working at a small logistics firm. I don't hate him. Not anymore. I just hope life teaches him the lessons I couldn't. Because sometimes, the harshest teacher isn't revenge. It's time. Sophie visits me every Sunday now. She brings groceries, sometimes dinner, and always stories. Her laughter has changed. It's lighter, more genuine. It reminds me of Carol in our younger years, when life was all dreams and beginnings. Watching her happy again feels like the universe's quiet apology. Because healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. One Sunday afternoon, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. Her and Michael, standing in front of a tiny house. They the Hoostbo were not rich. "Dad," she said, smiling softly. "But we're home." That one sentence undid me. I realized then that my greatest investment had never been the money. It was her strength. Because a true inheritance isn't passed through wills. It's built through love. I sometimes sit on the porch and imagine Carol sitting beside me. I tell her everything about Sophie, about Michael, about how it all ended. The wind moves through the trees, and I swear I can feel her approval in the breeze. I think she'd be proud of how I handled it. Not because I got even, but because I finally let go. Because forgiveness isn't weakness. It's wisdom wearing grace. There are days I still visit the bank, though not to work. Just to drop off pastries for the young tellers or chat with old colleagues. They still call me Mr. Greene, but I prefer Harold now. Titles are heavy. First names are human. And at 70, I've learned that being human is enough. Because dignity is quiet, and peace has no audience. Sometimes, when Sophie leaves after dinner, She hugs me a little longer than usual. She doesn't say much. She doesn't have to. Her silence says what words never could. Thank you for believing I could find my way. And I think maybe that's the real revenge. Not against Derek, but against bitterness itself. Because in the end, love is the only revenge that lasts. I've arranged my will differently now. Half of it goes to Sophie and Michael. The other half to a scholarship in Carol's name. For students who believe integrity is worth more than wealth. It feels right. Complete. Because a man's legacy shouldn't be about what he owned, but about what he inspired. Last night, I watched the sun set alone from my porch. The sky burned orange and gold, fading into deep purple. I thought about everything, the betrayal, the lesson, the redemption, and it all came down to one simple truth. You can control what people take from you, but you can control what they leave behind in your heart. Because life isn't fair, but it can still be beautiful. When darkness finally settled, I whispered into the quiet night, Carol, I kept my promise. She's safe now. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from revenge or justice, but from finally letting the light back in. Because when you've done right by love, the story always ends right. He thought I was just an old man with no fight left, but I was never fighting him. I was protecting what he never understood. A father's love doesn't retire. It just learns to outlast the pain. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you did. Like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Take care.